Fielding the 68, brought to you by Rhythm. We are 2 days away from Selection Sunday, and things have gotten chaotic. I'm Kevin Sweeney. Got Rocco Miller alongside me. We got Brad Wachtel joining us in just a moment. And look, I think we'll get into it all, Rocco, as we work our way through the bracket. We're going to go through the whole bubble today to catch things up. But big picture, Thursday tends to be the moving day where teams either play themselves in or play themselves out. And yesterday's results certainly, I think, probably created more questions than answers. Kind of a rare thing, and a lot of bubble teams winning. Is it fair to say? I guess I'll start with this. Is it fair to say that we actually have a strong bubble?
I'm the worst person to ask, Kevin, because I think if you're on the bubble in general, you have to have flaws. So at a certain point, if all these teams have flaws to a certain degree, you can't really call that strong. I've never really understood the concept of a weak or a strong bubble. However, to your question, I think where you're coming from here is most of the time, this time of year, you see more teams play themselves off. They just might have opportunity after opportunity, like kind of like what Villanova did, and just continue to fall short and eventually pile up too many losses to the point where you just don't have a place for them. Or maybe it's like a Wake Forest where they couldn't get that road win or get enough road wins. But this year, a lot of the teams in the mix continue to stay in the mix because they are getting late season wins. And that to me has been a little bit different. I just don't know if they're actually any stronger. I think we get that answer when they actually show up at the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, no question. And again, it's very difficult to compare year over year. But I do think, as you kind of alluded to, Rocco, I think teams are helping themselves this week, and that makes things interesting, right? It makes it fun. I mean, it's exciting, but it's also, certainly unnerving for a lot of these bubble teams. I know, I was at the Mountain West tournament last night, New Mexico versus Boise State. I think we walked into the week thinking that if New Mexico beat Boise in a quarterfinal game, they'd be in a very good position to be selected. Now with other teams winning, things get a little more interesting. I will point out one number for my case for the quote unquote strong bubble. So last year's Providence was 3-8 quad 1, 3-2 quad 2, 4-1 quad 3, 11-0 quad 4. They were in the field and didn't even get sent to a playing game. Like that or not, whatever. That's how the committee viewed it. This year's Providence is 6-8 quad 1, 3-4 quad 2, 1-0 quad 3, and 11-0 quad 4. They're out of a lot of brackets. We'll see if they're in or out in the field of the 68 bracket as we work our way through today. But I guess my case for the strong bracket would be this year-over-year comparison that my podcast partner Brad Cavallaro sent me this morning. That Providence seemingly has a better resume this year than they did a year ago, but maybe in worse shape for selection purposes.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I would imagine that this year's resumes are a little bit better across the board based on the fact that these teams are stepping up late in the year. Even a case like a Colorado, we're going to talk about all these teams on the show today, but a case like a Colorado, they've won now 7 in a row. Usually if you're a bubble team and you win 7 in a row, it's kind of like you're done. I think Utah State last year is a good example. They went from pretty much being out the entire last month of the season to just being so hot you couldn't leave them out. And then the committee gave them a 10, which I think actually outperformed our projection here on fielding the 68. So, yeah, it is kind of fascinating how it's playing out this year. There's going to be some really difficult decisions for the committee, no matter which way they go. I think one of the big takeaways I had from yesterday was like tuning into a lot of these games and hearing every network, didn't matter which game it was, saying that put the team in was a little mind-boggling. I think it's just creating it's setting up for a chaotic Selection Sunday where you're going to have anywhere from 1 to 3 enraged fan bases, no matter who gets picked, because the math tells you there's no room for we're going to probably focus on about 8 or 9 teams today. There might only be 4 or 5 spots. So if we're setting the wrong expectations, and look, I think a lot of us have Pittsburgh out still. I had Pittsburgh fans all over me yesterday. It's just one of those years where really hard decisions have to be made. But if you go through the process, hopefully the committee will get it right. Hopefully we'll get it right.
So now we've got Brad joining us. Brad, welcome to the program. Feeling 68. It's a busy day. We appreciate you you hopping on with us. I guess, we've just been talking about quote unquote like strong versus weak bubble, and the concept of, all right, like big picture, there's some teams that are playing well, that have made a case to be in, that are probably going to be left out, and that there's a lot of teams right now that are getting considered tournament teams when you turn on the television, because every team wins a big game and all of a sudden they're in the tournament, and maybe that's not the case. I guess for you, we're going to get into the nitty gritty of the bubble, but was there one result or two results yesterday? Because we'll get to the Mississippi State Tennessee game in a moment. Was there a result or two yesterday you thought moved the needle the most from a bubble standpoint?
Yeah, well, first of all, like you said, in terms of the bubble, I feel like it's almost unprecedented with the number of teams that are still alive for a bid. It's usually not like this. And there's going to be a lot of good teams that are going to be left out of the field. I really believe that. In terms of yesterday and what kind of moved the needle the most, so I think for Providence's sake, I think Providence had to win that game to really have any shot. And to beat a hot Creighton team like they did for the second time this season, to do so on a neutral court on the biggest stage, I think that means a lot. I really think that counts for a ton for them. And for their sake, there's a major separation between them and other bubble teams, and that's the fact that they don't have any bad losses. And now they pick up another quality win, so that gives them a huge boost to really put them in the thick of it with all these other teams. And then the other game that I would say that really made the difference for me is, there's really a couple, but obviously St. John's had to beat Seton Hall. I think people believe that they're very close to a lock, if not a lock. I don't believe that. I do have them in at the moment, but I think there is still a lot of other things that could happen. But I think they needed to win that game. It was on their home court. It was treated as a home game. It was just a quad 2 game, but it's a win against another team in the field. And Providence winning as well, for people that have them in the field, that's another game that boosts St. John's resume, and they already have the strong the strong metrics. So right now, I would say Providence and St. John's sticking with the Big East as two of the big winners.
Yeah, look, I think it's important to note, like, not all wins are created equal on a day like yesterday. Yes, a lot of them were quote unquote conference tournament quarterfinal wins, but not to say that Providence and Virginia were close coming into yesterday, but Virginia beating Boston College is not nearly the same impact on its resume as Providence beating Creighton. And again, we've talked all year about this, so I'm echoing your guys' takes from a million times. Like, individual game in a conference tournament is not the only thing that matters, right? Like, we don't completely change how we view Providence because they beat Creighton once. We don't completely change how we view Wake Forest because they lose to Pittsburgh. Like, Wake Forest is going to be out because of the body of work, not because of one loss. Providence is not going to be in just because they win, a big game there, right? I mean, Villanova, same thing, right? Villanova losing to Marquette is the straw that broke the camel's back, perhaps. But it is not the reason that Villanova is not going to be in the NCAA tournament if, in fact, they're not selected. So, look, I think it's going to be fascinating. And I guess it's a good way to segue into our one game of real note that's happened already today, which can lead us into one seeds and also the bubble. Mississippi State dominating Tennessee. This is a team that I think a lot of bracketologists that I've come across have been somewhat skeptical of. I know that they had that kind of eyesore record in quad 1 and 2 games, have the quad 4 loss. We're really relying on those two big home court wins over Tennessee and against Auburn. Well, Mississippi State goes out, really dominates Tennessee. Rocco, I know, again, these things are constantly moving targets and whatnot. Is it safe to call Mississippi State a lock after blowing out the Volunteers?
There's a chance. I wouldn't call it a lock because it happened on Friday. Again, we don't know exactly where the committee's at with their actual process. You'd like to think, especially with how crazy the bubble is, they're working all the way through the weekend to get the right 68 teams. And I'm going to go ahead and project it that way, but you just never know. So I never want to say 100% lock. I actually, before today started, struggled a lot with Mississippi State, Texas A&M, and Seton Hall as my last 3 teams for 2 spots. It was very difficult to decide 2 of those 3, very different profiles. And so Mississippi State clearly, like, out of that situation for today, and you can't take that win away anymore. And you just hope that the committee gave it full credit. And that's their second win against Tennessee. But you can't also take away that they've lost they're still only 8-11 in the top two quads. It's not like a surefire lock situation just because of that one result, as you alluded to. But for all intents and purposes, as long as it was factored in, I would think that that's enough to put them in the field, and ideally for the Bulldogs, get them out of Dayton as well.
Yeah, Brad, just your thoughts quickly. Like, I would imagine that if most people had Mississippi State in the field today, it's going to be impossible to now get them out. Now that they've just added an elite neutral court win, maybe the committee viewed Mississippi State a lot differently than I think most of the bracket matrix, and certainly our crew here at Fielding 68 did. But it feels to me like it's going to be hard to knock them out unless we're not seeing what the committee is.
Yeah, just to echo what Rocco said, I think they're safely in the field, and I think they should avoid Dayton as well. I actually had them avoiding Dayton prior to this game. I think they kind of fit on that 10 seed line. I'm not going to change them at all. I think they would stay in that position right there. That quad 4 loss is early in the season is still a noticeable flaw on their resume. But when you beat Tennessee twice, who's in play for a 1 seed, but probably going to get a 2 seed, you have some other quality wins against the field. I feel like they're in good shape for a bid.
Yeah, one other thing.
Sorry, Rock.
One other thing on the Bulldogs. It's kind of an important point why I wouldn't put them 100% lock. Depending on the value of top 2 quadrant road games, true road games, Mississippi State was awful. That doesn't change today. They're still 1-8. That's by far the worst record on the bubble. So just depending on how the committee members want to drill, how far they want to drill into that, I gave them a little bit of a hall pass because they got the 2 neutral court wins against the field, as Brad was just alluding to. Northwestern and Washington State will both be tournament teams. And I think that helps cushion some of that 1-8 blow. But it is a very ugly road record. And so that's why I don't want to give it 100%.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would say, if we were in the committee room right now and we were debating this, and you brought up that point, I think my response would be that the NCAA tournament is played on a neutral court, and they beat Washington State, they beat Northwestern, they beat Tennessee. I think they beat Rutgers on a semi-neutral, right? It's a very, very tricky calculus, without question. This Mississippi State resume not without flaws, and I think they were in danger of potentially being right at the cut line had they lost today. Instead, I think gave themselves certainly the feather in the cap they would have wanted. Let's hit the 1 seeds. Obviously we send these in this morning, but we have an update anyway. Purdue, Houston, UConn, and North Carolina up to the number 1 line. No changes other than the order. Houston jumping UConn in our order. Again, how much that matters? Not a lot. Theoretically, if they're the 2nd and 3rd 1 seeds, they would play each other in Phoenix. They will have their own separate paths. That's a noticeable thing to continue to track. 2 versus 3 on the seedless. Purdue in good position at the 1 spot, and Tennessee I know had been in that number 1 conversation. North Carolina jumps up past them. I'll hit you, Brad, with this. Your thoughts on Carolina's number 1 seed case, and given Tennessee now done playing, Arizona taking the loss to USC last week, is this the Tar Heels' spot to lose?
I think it absolutely is. I feel pretty good about North Carolina being that final number 1 seed. And I actually had them as the final number 1 seed prior to Tennessee's loss. Carolina is now 8-3 against quad 1 opponents as compared to Tennessee's 7-6. They match up the same with Arizona, but as you mentioned, Arizona has a quad 3 loss, strength of record of 11, whereas Carolina's is 4. So it's possible at this point right now, the committee has their mind made up as the 4 number 1 seeds. Can Arizona pass Carolina? I mean, if Carolina loses tonight, I'm not going to say it's an absolute no, but right now I'm feeling pretty good about Carolina being that 4th number 1 seed, and I believe our number 1 seeds are pretty close to being set.
And just quickly, Rocco, I know obviously we have to see numbers refresh, but 1, do you see it similarly? And 2, does Tennessee wind up as that first number 2, or does Arizona jump back up?
Yeah, I'm with Brad. I had North Carolina there before the result today as well, and mainly because I thought it was very close. I thought it was a great argument for both teams to take that spot. Mainly Tennessee has 9 wins against the field, which is pretty dominant compared to North Carolina's smaller sample size of just earning 6 of those. But record-wise, Carolina's had better records. They have more quad one wins before today. They have a dominant road record. They played 10 true road games in the top two quads, went 8-2. That's second best in the country behind St. Mary's. And I think, doing that in a power league means a little bit more than what St. Mary's did, of course. And so some of those things I think were why the committee at the reveal told us North Carolina was above Tennessee. If you remember, Carolina came in 5th overall and Tennessee came 6th. And as soon as Tennessee took a home loss to Kentucky last week, it reminded me of where we were then and where we are now. And that mix of results for both teams kind of put us back to where we started in my book. And that's why I gave the nod to Carolina. Now it's, of course, a little bit more of a slam dunk to Carolina.
And Carolina has
Good
not
stuff.
lost since the reveal, to top it off.
Yeah.
There you go.
No, I mean, Heels have found a way and added an elite win at that by winning on the road at Duke. Not get a crack at Duke this week because Duke lost to NC State, but could potentially play Virginia in the ACC championship game. Maybe that would move the needle a little bit. We will see what happens. Maybe a Pittsburgh win would be quad one. That might help the Tar Heels a little bit, but I think either way in good position for that top line. When we come back, we're going to go through the bubble, starting with our last 4 buys. See you then.
The best month of the year is here, which is why you need to know that we are now partnered with BetMGM. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for the listeners and the viewers of the Field of 68 all through the NCAA tournament. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, you can use the bonus code FIELD, and you will get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM, regardless of whether or not that bet hits. Here's the best part. All you need to do is deposit and bet $10 of your hard-earned money. This is how you make it work. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using the bonus code FIELD. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game, and you get up to $1,500 in bonus bets, regardless of the outcome of your bet. Just make sure you use that bonus code FIELD when you sign up. Most importantly, we do have some fun stuff coming for the conference tournaments and especially for the NCAA tournament. Bet insurance tokens, college hoops odds boosts, and what I love the most, a nice parlay boost for anything you could possibly imagine betting on in the NCAA tournament, from odds and getting an at-large bid to Final Four futures to the highest seed to make to the Sweet 16. I'm calling it right now. BetMGM is the king of the prop bet for your March Madness needs. So go download the BetMGM app, use the code FIELD, and sign up today. And while I've got you, a quick request: the best way to support the Field of 68 and our content you get for free is to engage with us. Rate and review the pod, like and share the YouTube videos, tell your friends about us. It helps in a world where the algorithm is king. And now, back to the show.
Field in the 68, brought to you by Rhythm, counting down the hours till Selection Sunday, just 2 days away. Kevin Sweeney coming to you from Las Vegas, where I will be watching Mountain West basketball until the crack of dawn. Rocco Miller, Brad Wachtel alongside me. And we've got a lot to get through. We're working through the bubble today. The final 3 segments of the show will all be bubble related. We're going to do a little bit differently than normal. Usually, each bracketologist brings their own, top, last 4 and first out. Today, we're going to just reveal the consensus and let the bracketologists, work through their thoughts on it. So we're going to start with the last 4 buys. Let's put up our consensus last 4 buys here. An interesting group of schools: Oklahoma, Michigan State, Mississippi State, and Virginia. Oklahoma, a very interesting team in that, they're one of the teams that lost very early, eliminated, I believe, on Wednesday, mid-afternoon by TCU. That they are now sitting uncomfortably as other teams potentially try to pass them. And another, Mississippi State obviously in that mix. We just mentioned Virginia. So it's an interesting group of teams. I guess I'll start with you, Rocco. Any concern that Oklahoma could get passed by all these schools?
Yeah, I like I said with some of the other teams we've already talked about, I never want to say 0% concern. I think Oklahoma's fascinating because they played 13 teams or 13 games against teams that are NCAA level and went 2-11. I mean, that's pretty foul for all the opportunities they had. And both of those wins were at home, beat good teams. They beat BYU and Iowa State. But outside of that, they were 0-11 in the other games. And so you see a set of results that would just make a data company proud for gaming the net a little bit, because none of their losses came outside of Q1. So I think they will be the data mining poster child for the 2025 schedule. But yeah, because you're looking at a team that, when you factor in every game that what I would call meaningful, top 3 quads, they're right where they need to be at 500, 12-12. It's a pretty bland resume overall, but it's just enough to get the job done. They also didn't have a great road neutral record, but they're 6-8. There are some other bubble teams they're compared against that we'll talk about soon. It's actually a little bit better record there. And that's good enough, too, for the strength of resume metric and others to call them a top 30. They're coming in 32 this morning on that metric. So all your checks and balances are also giving you green check marks for the Sooners. So they just really kind of threaded the needle with their schedule, despite really going through a lot of losing.
Brad, wanted to hit you on Virginia. Virginia, a team that I think has been the poster child for maybe the fans' eye test of, all right, are we sure we want this team in the tournament? And even yesterday's win against Boston College, obviously, not the prettiest game, missed a lot of free throws. I think at 57 points at the end of regulation. I saw a tweet that they went on like a 7-2 run over 8 minutes and 17 seconds or something to the extent of that. Like, it's not a pretty brand of basketball, but it's a winning brand of basketball for the most part. And it feels like Virginia has found enough ways to stay in the field that it's going to be hard to knock them out. Though I would note, and I'm sure you will mention this as well, maybe playing NC State, not the best thing in the world for them today, a slightly worse potential loss than had they played Duke in essentially a can't-lose situation.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even with last night playing Boston College, that was not the ideal matchup. Had Virginia lost to Boston College, I think they would have been in major trouble. Funny thing about NC State, though, with NC State making a little bit of a run in this conference tournament, NC State's net has gone all the way up to 69. So if you start looking at Virginia's numbers in the quadrants, while they're just 2-6 against Q1, which is not good, but I will say those 2 wins at Clemson and Florida on a neutral court, wins away from home against tournament teams. Committee loves that. Very important. Virginia is now 10-9 against quad 1 and 2 opponents with no bad losses. And the no bad losses thing is a pretty big deal because the committee's going through and they're looking at all these resumes, trying to find flaws, trying to find the strengths. And there's only a handful of teams that have no bad losses. To go with that, Virginia has strong result-based metrics. They have a 25 strength of record right now, a 37 KPI. Their predictive metrics are not very good and kind of, for me, place them in Dayton with the way they are at the moment. But they have a big game tonight, and because there's so many bubble teams still playing that are still alive, trying to get a bid, you got to keep winning. You got to keep winning because you never know what's going to happen with one loss. You could lose a game, Virginia. All these other bubble teams could start winning. You could get jumped. There's going to be a lot of disappointed teams on Selection Sunday. I guarantee you that.
Michigan State sees their regular season come to a close. They lose to Purdue. They play Purdue very competitively, though. So no potential dip there. Feels like at 19-14, Rocco, that Michigan State has done enough. But where do you see this team? Is this a last 4 buys team? Is this a team that could be potentially sent to Dayton? Do you think we see them in an 8-9 game and they wind up potentially challenging a 1 seed in round 2? Like it feels like a pretty wide range of outcomes here for the Spartans at 19-14.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. I think all 3 of those outcomes are possible because it really depends on how the voting goes within the room on where they stack Michigan State. The way I try to break it out independently, and again, I also try to think of it as a group think as well, because that's really how it plays out, is they are a little bit more at risk due to those 14 losses. Last year, only 1 team, West Virginia, got in with 14 losses. However, a team with Michigan State's criteria and resume is the type of team that would get selected just based on the fact that they played a top 40 schedule. They're a top 25 metrics team across the board. Their records, of course, are poor because they lost 14 games and they had just enough good wins. They're throwing a little bit of a blind shield over everybody's eyes with the win over Baylor because it was in Detroit. That was basically a home game. Counts as a neutral in the net sorting tools. So, but it's good enough for the Spartans. I think all they really needed to do is stay above 500 or at 500 in their meaningful games and not get to that 15th loss. They threaded the needle. Another team that threaded the needle. I'm splitting the difference. I think you could argue they go up to an 8-9 game just based on their performance if you want to reseed after they've been selected. But I thought last year's committee did a nice job of balancing not just giving all the good seeds to the predictive dominant teams, metric darlings, if you will, but also balancing that with good resumes. So if they do it that way, I think they wind up right in the middle as a 10 seed.
Yeah, Brad, just curious your thoughts, kind of big picture on that seeding question. With a team like Michigan State, where if the quality metrics consider this a top 20 team, is it fair to ship a 1 seed off to play them in the second round? Maybe not, but at the same time, they've lost 14 games for a reason, and rewarding them, too much from a seeding standpoint does feel a bit thin. How do you come down on that argument?
Yeah, 14 losses and 5-10 away from home. That's not good. I mean, let's be real. That's just not good. Their predictive metrics, though, as Rocco touched on, they're top 20. So predictive metrics are not used for inclusion. They're used for seeding. So for me, I agree with Rocco. I think they're more of a 10 seed. I could see them being a 9. They could drop to Dayton, but I'm leaning more towards them being a better seed than Dayton because of those predictive metrics. And I think the lesson that a lot of teams should take from this, as Rocco mentioned, Michigan State's non-conference strength of schedule, top 40 in the country. If that non-conference strength of schedule was 300, would this team be in the field? I mean, I think that would be a...
No.
The only thing I would say in response to that is that they probably don't have 14 losses if they're 300th in non-conference schedule, right? They're probably like 23-10, and they lost big games in the non-conference that they scheduled, tough, right? Like they lost to Arizona. There's no shame in that. They lost to Duke. There's no shame in that. Like James Madison beaten, but.
So Kevin, you're saying they would be Nebraska, is what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I actually think that's a pretty good comparison. Right, I think they'd be in this. I think they'd actually be in about the same spot.
Yeah.
But
fair enough. No, I'm totally cool with that. But I do think that, take away everything aside, looking at the quadrant numbers, 3-9 Q1, 9-14 quad 1 and 2. I think if they had something that stuck out on their resume that was so putrid, and I get it. If their schedule was easier, they'd probably have more wins. But the more wins doesn't guarantee you anything either, as we know. I think that I just think it's a lesson that a lot of some coaches don't care about, because coaches just want wins. They want wins, and then they don't look at the bigger picture. And I think that's something that a lot of coaches need to change.
Yeah, look, I think it'll be interesting. Yeah. As we had to break, and Rocco, you're the scheduling guru, so correct me if I'm wrong here. Like, I do think that the committee has some opportunities to, like, kind of tell people what they're looking for, right? Like, if they reward, some of these teams that played really poor non-conference schedules, then all right, then we're going to see the recipe, right? Like, run it up in the non-conference, boost the numbers, get to 20 wins, you're a tournament team, right? If they reward these teams that have very high strength of records because they've beaten a bunch of quad 3 games instead of quad 4 games. Well, that'll tell you something different if they reward the teams that have a couple of great wins, but kind of a thin resume outside of that. Well, again, it'll teach you something. So I'm curious to see how all of this is shaken out. I think the interesting thing about this bubble, which we'll get into as we get to the last 4 in here next segment, almost every team has a thing you can point to and say this is why they should miss the tournament. They also have many of them have a case to be in as well. But all of them do have something that you can point to and say, yeah, like, I don't think Texas A&M should be in the tournament because they have 5 quad 3 losses, right? Like, every team has something like that you can say that's the reason why.
Yeah, I agree, Kevin. As a whole, I think the bigger answer to the question is unrelated to bracketology or getting into the tournament. It's all it has to do with is job security. Not very many coaches today have the tenure and the support as a Tom Izzo or a Bill Self. And so those, or a Bruce Pearl, those are the kinds of guys that go out and have top 40 schedules every year, because they realize if they go lose 14 games and squeak in or miss a tournament or two, like out of every decade, they're fine. But the average coach, we've seen it, they can be ran in a year. And so, when push comes to shove, most coaches are going to take that Iowa State model, TCU model, BYU model of scheduling until, they've been there for 15, 20 years. Even like a Jamie Dixon, who's been there forever, TCU's best coach ever, still scheduled in the 300s. So that's really what it's about, in my opinion.
If I could add one more thing real quick about scheduling, and then we'll move on. So,
yeah.
And I know, Rocco, you do an excellent job with helping teams schedule. For me, though, when in terms of scheduling, it's not always about playing top 25 teams. It's not loading up your schedule with the toughest of tough games. It's not all about that. It's not playing the worst of the worst teams. It's not like going out and saying, I'm going to schedule the team that is going to pick last in the Northeast Conference, because that's killing your non-conference strength of schedule. And I don't think teams understand that. You want to play teams, if you want to get wins and you believe you're an NCAA tournament team, play teams that are going to be picked to win their league in lower level leagues. That is going to help your strength of schedule. Okay? And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think one example I'd point to here before we go to break, like New Mexico has a bad non-conference strength schedule. No one's saying it's not. No one's saying it's great, but New Mexico's would be a lot worse if they played the worst team in the WAC instead of UT Arlington, who's I think the 3 seed in their tournament, and they didn't play UC Irvine, and they didn't play Santa Clara and UC Santa Barbara. Like they did, yeah. We can quibble with their strategy, big picture of playing so many home games, but it may be the difference between them getting in and not, that they played some real teams at home, boosted their the numbers a little bit. Every marginal decision matters, and I think that's one of the cool things about getting to this point in the year is you get to zoom in on every micro decision that gets made in a basketball program for 365 days to get to this moment. So we're going to head to break. When we come back, last 4 in. Who makes the cut on Friday here on Field 68?
There is nothing better in sports than tournament time, which is why I need to tell you guys about our partners over at Rhythm. If you're into sports betting, you need Rhythm, the place for data-backed props and picks. For those that are unfamiliar, Rhythm, spelled RITHMM, is the go-to mobile app for player props and game picks. Backed by AI predictive models, Rhythm helps you make smarter and faster betting decisions across all sports, but particularly college basketball. With Rhythm, you get data-backed picks for every single Division I game, every single day. Users get free picks daily with the ability to upgrade to unlimited access. If you want to increase your edge and win more bets, go to the link in the description and download Rhythm today. That's RITHMM, the place for data-backed props and picks. And while we're here, let me tell you about our newest partner for the month of March, Splash Sports, the home of certified community competition, where you get to play against your friends and not the house. Whatever game it is that you are playing, from survivors to tiers to pick X, the safest way to play for real money without the hassle of having to track down deposits or worry about payments is through Splash. They have partnered with PaySafe, the best deposit and payment system in the world, to ensure that money stays in safe hands and is delivered to the right places. To join the Field of 68 Survivor Madness, click the link in our profile below and join in. Entries are $5 a pop with a prize pool of up to $4,500. Winner take all. Join Splash and come prove that you're smarter than us.
Last 4 in time on Fielding the 68. We are halfway home on our Friday show. 2 days from Selection Sunday. The countdown continues. We just went through our last 4 buys. Let's show the final 4 teams in our projected field, the teams that will be headed to Dayton. We've got 2 Big East teams. St. John's and Seton Hall played yesterday, could potentially play again out in Dayton. Both teams, questionable resumes in some form. Seton Hall lacking the metrics, but having some of the great wins. St. John's lacking the great wins, but having the metrics. Then there's Colorado, who lacks those resume toppers, but they played really, really well lately, beat Utah last night. And our last team in the field is Texas A&M. The Aggies, 19-13, 9-9, 12-8 against the top two quadrants, but have 5 quadrant 3 losses. A very, very interesting case for the Aggies. I guess I'll start with the Big East, and I'm going to go to you, Brad. So Seton Hall and St. John's, both in the first 4. Curious where you had them, how you break apart these resumes. I think, again, conference record, you guys preach it all the time. Conference record is not a factor. It doesn't matter. But I also think it'd be really hard to tell Seton Hall, a team that beat UConn, a team that has a 13-7 record and a double round robin Big East, but they're not a tournament team. How did you see those two Big East teams, and where do you separate them?
I agree with that, and some fans have a hard time grasping this, but so I have St. John's as actually my final 10 seed at the moment, getting that bye, and I have Seton Hall in Dayton, but I actually think Seton Hall is safer than St. John's. What it boils down to is their predictive metrics. That's why I have St. John's ahead. But in terms of Seton Hall's resume and why I think they should and will be in the field, I mean, you pointed it out. They beat UConn. That's a monster win. That's period. Like that's a separating win from a lot of these other teams that are on the bubble. They have a top 40 strength of record, and with Providence winning yesterday, with St. John's even beating Seton Hall. I mean, Seton Hall still took 2 out of 3 games against St. John's. They won at Providence, and like we said, they beat UConn and they beat Marquette. To me, that sounds like an NCAA tournament resume. And some might say, well, their net is 65, but the net, that has nothing to do with inclusion. That has things to do with seeding. So that should be a non-factor for me, which is why I think Seton Hall should be in the field. But I also think that they're destined for Dayton. In terms of St. John's, I feel pretty good about them. Not as good as most people, partially because they only have 3 wins against the field. The Creighton win is obviously a very big win. And then the other 2 wins against Seton Hall and Providence, if you have them in the field. And those are 2 teams that are, if they're in Dayton. So it's not as great of a resume as you would think. And then a lot of their wins are against teams that are not going to be in the field. That being said, they're still playing. Their numbers should probably improve regardless of the result against UConn, assuming they don't lose by 30. So they'll get a nice uptick in their metrics. And then what it boils down to for them and their seeding, they're top 30 in predictive metrics in KenPom and BPI, and top 40 in top 35 in net as well.
Yeah, look, I think it'll be interesting. I think the Dayton destination for Seton Hall feels somewhat likely at this point, maybe even very likely. But we'll see what happens. I know that the Pirates were one of those teams that kind of coming into the week, it felt like, all right, there's nothing they can do to play themselves out. Losing to St. John's, certainly not a catastrophic loss, but everyone playing well around the bubble does have, I think, people around that situation maybe a little more nervous than they would have expected to be this week. Let's head to the back half. Rocco, Colorado and Texas A&M. I want to zoom in first on the A&M situation because I think it's fascinating. The top tier wins are great. They're playing quite well right now. That being said, the Memphis loss dropped from 75 to 76. So now Texas A&M has 5 quadrant 3 losses. It was already pretty wild when they had 4. We added a 5th. Does it matter? Like again, I find it kind of ridiculous on its face that we would leave Texas. If you were going to put Texas A&M in, but now Memphis is 76 instead of 75, you're not going to now. That to me feels ridiculous. But I mean, to have 5 quote unquote bad losses is, pretty unprecedented for a potential at-large team, correct?
Yeah, on its head for sure. But I think it's important not to get too obsessed with the quads. I think you track, especially when it comes to the bubble, you want to track what your record was against potential NCAA tournament teams. And something I track that has really kind of paid off is how many teams did you lose to that are not going to be in the field. And that number didn't change because Memphis wasn't going to be in the field unless they made a big run or got that late FAU win, which they didn't. And that's where Texas A&M is very polarizing because they have 6 losses outside of the field to teams either NIT or worse. Of course, teams like Arkansas twice and Vanderbilt are not probably even going to the NIT. So you have to look at the team names. You have to understand what the whys and the hows, just like you have to understand the whys and the hows of their good wins. I think they're equally as important, especially on the bubble, because we're in a situation right now where these decisions are not clear cut. So I spent a lot of time dissecting each of these categories to try to figure out more ways to separate the teams because it's really not cut and dry. And I think with A&M, you love that they're a 21st ranked non-conference strength of schedule that stands out big time in a last 2 spot discussion for inclusion. You also love the fact that they had 5 true road wins inside the top 2 quadrants. Unfortunately for the Aggies, none of those 5 teams are going to the tournament, but they still matter. And they also had a positive road neutral record at 9-8. So you have all the ammunition to put them in, and you have a ton of ammunition to keep them out. So from there, you basically take that big bundle of activity and you got to compare it to, the Seton Halls, the St. John's, the New Mexicos, the Providences, the Pittsburghs, and it's not easy. And that's why you have to then where my head goes from there is, what do you think the committee values the most? It always comes down to that age-old sentence, or that 3-part sentence, which is, who did you play, where did you play, how did you do? And again, A&M's kind of just stuck in the middle because there's so much good and so much bad. So they're there to be selected. I left them as the first team out today.
So here's an interesting thing. I guess I'll hit both of you guys with. 2 years ago, A&M was probably the most controversial team to be left out of the field. Buzz Williams obviously had his legendary, packets and binders full of evidence as to why he believed they should have been in and whatnot. And it was it was very public that the main issue, or a main issue, for Texas A&M that year was that they played a very, very poor non-conference strength of schedule. I'm looking on KenPom right now. KenPom had their schedule that year as 308th. So 2 years later, I know the committee changes and it's not necessarily the same faces, but 2 years later, A&M is in a similar position where they're right on the bubble, and they did play that tough strength schedule. And I do wonder if there is a sense of all right, they did what we asked them to do. They've earned this, right? I think it'd be hard to say, well, 1 year you're on the bubble, you don't get in because you played, didn't play enough teams in the non-conference, then you lose too many times and you're screwed, right? That to me would be hard. I'm curious you guys' thoughts on that.
Well, I would say that every year is different, right? So you could say that, and of course, if Buzz gets left out again, that's gonna be his first talking point. I promise. Mark it down right now. But the reality is, they're being compared to a whole different set of teams this year than they were that year. The circumstances are completely different, and in most cases, if you are the one team with that strong of a schedule, it typically goes in your favor. It's just the fact that they have so many out of bounds losses. How do you weigh that appropriately? Does the bad outweigh the good? You could actually argue both sides of that pretty fairly. And that's where maybe we finally get to a point where, a metric like strength of resume, where they're 49th right now, which isn't as good as Seton Hall. It's not as good as St. John's. It's still behind, where Mississippi State was before today. It's even, well behind a Providence team and others. So you really don't have that extra piece of evidence you're looking for, which is why I left them out. But I could, like I said, I could easily see the argument for inclusion too.
Brad, just quickly here, I wanted to get to Colorado since we didn't mention them. They were our second to last team in the field. They've won now 7 straight. Have Washington State tonight, which is a game that really wouldn't hurt their resume too much. It's a quad 1 game. Is this a win and in situation? Is this still dangerous because they don't have a ton of great stuff at the top of their resume? They're an example. Again, we talk about the quadrant lines. That's not necessarily being gospel. I mean, this team has a loss to Arizona State, a loss to Cal, a loss to UCLA, a loss to Florida State, None of those are particularly pretty, but I believe as of today, they're all quad 2 versus quad 3. How different are we thinking about this Colorado resume if those are considered quad 3 losses instead of quad 2? Just kind of curious your thoughts on the Buffs right now.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, Arizona State is 133 in the net, so they're just 3 spots away from it being a quad 3 loss. But, at this point, the committee's got what they're looking at. I don't think that's going to change anything. But yeah, in terms of Colorado, they're one of those teams that are the metric darlings. I mean, they're top 40 in result-based metrics. But the bottom line is with them, and this is what concerns me because there's so many teams on the bubble that have strong resumes. They currently only have 1 win against the field, and that's against Washington State, and that was at home. It's not that impressive. I mean, when you're trying to compare them to everybody else, it's not. And if all you have is strong metrics, that's not enough to get into the field. And right now, Indiana State is an example of that. They haven't beaten anybody that's in the field. I mean, their numbers are considerably worse than Colorado. I'm not comparing the two, but just in the sense that, you got to beat teams that are going to be in the field. So if they can beat Washington State again for a second time on a neutral court, I think that will help their case immensely. If they lose, I think we're going to have to see how the rest of these games go tonight, and they could find themselves out of the field for sure.
Going to be very, very fascinating to watch this late night Pac-12 action as well as late night Mountain West. I think we'll be talking about one of those Mountain West teams coming up in the first 4 out. Don't go anywhere, folks. Bring it home. Fielding the 68 on a Friday.
By now, you guys have surely heard about Autograph, an app founded by Tom Brady with the intention of disrupting the way that fans consume content covering their favorite teams. This is how the app works. All of the podcasters, bloggers, and digital creators covering a team have their content sent to that team's page in the Autograph app. Instead of having to bounce from site to site or trying to navigate the safer workspaces on Twitter, you can just scroll through Autograph. This isn't a hard sell. This is the truth. I am a UConn fan, and I use the Autograph app to keep up with the writers I read and the pods that I listen to about UConn basketball. The best part is that every piece of content that you consume gives you reward points. The more you get, the more chances you have at things like discounted tickets to games and the grand prize, a trip to the LA Regional and a spot in a suite for the Sweet 16 and Elite 8 games. Here's the best part. We've partnered with Autograph to donate $1 to the V Foundation every time someone downloads the app using the code F68, with a minimum of $2,500 getting donated. The app is free. So download, use the code F68, help us raise a little bit of money for cancer research, and give Autograph a try. I promise you it will be worth it. And while we're here, a quick reminder, make sure that you subscribe to the Daily. We have new landing pages with deep dives into each coaching change, as well as a tracker that provides scouting reports on the transfers that have entered the portal that you are going to want to know about. Hit the link below to subscribe.
Fielding 68 brought to you by Rhythm. We are going through the bubble, which has gotten very interesting here in the last couple of days, and will continue to be interesting all the way until the bracket is officially revealed on Selection Sunday. I am Kevin Sweeney, joined by Rocco Miller, Brad Wachtel. It's been a great show. Appreciate y'all sticking with us. Finally, round out our first 4 out. These were the teams that missed the cut in today's consensus. Number 1 is Providence. Providence had got the 6th quadrant 1 win last night against Creighton. Gets another opportunity today against Marquette. Opportunity galore. I mean, that's all you can ask for if you're a team like the Friars. The Lobos of New Mexico, 2nd team out of the field. Again, a team that I think we coming into the week thought, get one big one and you're probably in. Well, maybe not. See what the Lobos can do tonight. Would note at 7-7 now, quad 1 and 2 record, and notably, I believe New Mexico has 7 wins against the field. I'd have to check that, but I believe that's their number as I was looking this morning. Indiana State, our 3rd team out, has not been a fun week for the Sycamores, watching other teams win as they sit idly by. And then Pitt. I mean, we talked about opportunity. What better opportunity for the Panthers than North Carolina here this evening? Win that game. Things get very, very interesting. Brad, you've been our Big East guy all day. Also, so I'll hit you with the Friars first. 6 quad 1 wins, no bad losses. Certainly have kind of ditched the Bryce Hopkins question now after yet another big win without him. I mean, does it? Is this a situation where they lose today and they're just a toss up and win today and they're in? I mean, how do you view what the Friars have accomplished so far?
Yeah, I think if they win today, beating Marquette, I still think that's enough to put them in the field. I really do. They could still be in without the win today. Again, they're one of those teams that do not have any bad losses on their resume. And as you mentioned, 6 Quadrant 1 wins, 6-8. Pretty good record for a bubble team against Quadrant 1 opponents. Beating Creighton twice, beating Marquette. They beat Wisconsin earlier. I know that was with Bryce Hopkins. One at Seton Hall. They beat St. John. I mean, they have a lot of quality wins. The one downside to their resume, and you hear the committee talk about this every once in a while, their record against Quadrant 1 through 3 opponents. And right now they are just 10-12. Being under 500 against quad 1 through 3 opponents, is not the best thing in the world. And that's one of probably their most significant flaw. Non-conference strength of schedule, 236, not particularly great. But I think that is their one flaw. If they're not in the field, I think it's going to come back to the committee saying, this is why they're not in the field. But if they can beat Marquette, that gives them 7 Quadrant 1 wins, 7-8. They're in. I mean, I don't really think there's a question about it. And I know they're competing against so many other teams right now. But I think that resume is going to be better than everyone else if they do win that game.
I guess one thing again, this is our committee room conversation. The question I will press you with, Brad, is this: if Georgetown and DePaul were just normal bad teams, like instead of historically bad, particularly DePaul, Providence still likely beats them because they're bad teams. They lose a lot of games, and Providence all of a sudden is what, 14-12 against quad 1 through 3, or 13-12, right? Like I guess that's where I get kind of tied up, right? Like, are we missing the forest for the trees, saying, oh well, because DePaul is like actually this terrible, or because Rhode Island 90th and it needed to be 160th, or whatever the cut lines are, right? Like, I guess to me that would be a very frustrating thing of like, all right, it's not like we scheduled incredibly poorly. It's not our fault that 2 teams in our league are it's not our fault that our biggest rival and local team is terrible. It's not our fault. We did schedule, played at Oklahoma. We played at MT with 2 Power 5s, right? Like, what more are we supposed to do, right? Like, I guess that's my question to you, and answer for that. But I'm just curious on that thinking.
Yeah, so I mean, New Mexico could say the same thing. I mean, teams at the bottom of their league, is it their fault that there are some really bad teams in their league? I mean, it is what it is. But I think the great part is, with the team sheets, the committee should see all this information. So you're not just looking at numbers, you're looking at who those Quadrant 4 games against. And like you said, yeah, 4 of them are conference games. So if your only reason to keep Providence out is because of that record against Q1 through 3, that's not a good enough reason. Not a good enough reason. So it's a great point that you make. And, hopefully the committee is really looking into these team sheets and not just looking at numbers.
Yes, it'll be very interesting. And again, they somewhat control their own destiny. Win tonight against a Tyler Kolek-less Marquette, they're probably a tournament team. So see what happens. Rocco, New Mexico, beat Boise last night. Looked pretty good doing it. Now a top 25 team in the net, I believe 23rd in the net today. I know the net is not the way we're selecting teams, but is there a point of no return here with the Lobos where, look, I mean, obviously it's going to be controversial for someone to get left out, but how big of a deal would it be for the NCAA to leave out a team that could be, top 25 in the metrics?
Well, I don't know if it necessarily be that big of a deal. It depends. It's all about your perspective. And we're in a different era with social media and the net. And it's only our 5th bracket in this particular era. But I remember years in the RPI where teams in the top 25 got left out. It wasn't unheard of. So I don't let things like that get in the way of what the evaluation process should be. which is all the things I repeated earlier about some of the other teams. But in reality, I did move New Mexico into the field. I thought it was important for them to beat Boise State specifically. They had already beaten the other Mountain West tournament teams at least once. Of course, their big feather in their cap is sweeping Nevada. Now they've beaten everybody in the league. I thought, that is a compelling story that the committee would discuss. And if I'm the Mountain West representative, I'm for sure leading with that as the start of my statement. The other thing you really like about New Mexico, away neutral, 11-6. I get that a good chunk of those were quad 3, but that still says a lot when you're trying to make up for home losses to Air Force and UNLV, which are subpar losses. And the strength resume metric, I think you can give them a little bit of a leeway. It does look ugly at number 63. It's far out of bounds compared to most of these bubble teams we're comparing them to. But I think that one specific Air Force loss is a big reason for it. We saw like a 15 spot drop after that day. So now it's really just about who do you think's better. And I think they've done enough to get in. And I feel a little bit better about them than like an Indiana State or a Seton Hall or even like that very shaky Texas A&M team now.
Yeah, Rocco, just quickly here. I think probably coming into the week, it was very close in most people's eyes between Indiana State and New Mexico, with a lot of people giving the edge to Indiana State. And Indiana State now our third team out, New Mexico our second team out. How much has New Mexico helped itself by adding an extra quad 1 win to its mix? And, obviously still having the opportunity to get another tonight against Colorado State. Do you feel that they've passed the Sycamores and how big of a deal is that?
Yeah, it's a big deal. I passed them right above the Sycamores today. I actually have New Mexico above St. John's as well. St. John's and Indiana State are my last two in the field. But I think, it was really important for them to get another win away from home. The biggest thing against New Mexico, in my opinion, was in their 7 big road games against the top 2 quads, they went 1-6. That they got arguably the hardest win was at Nevada, and they got that one, but they lost the other 6. So now by sprinkling in some neutral court action and specifically getting the Boise win that they couldn't get during the season, really closes some of the gap that existed from where I'm sitting. Again, you can't ignore the 272 non-conference strength of schedule. You can't ignore the Air Force loss. But I think there's enough there now, especially when compared to the other options. And that's all it is. It's a beauty pageant. What do you like better? And I think New Mexico, not only the way they play on the court, but the merits now are supporting their inclusion from what I can see.
Brad, is the discussion with Pitt as simple as win today or no shot? Or how do you view the Panthers? Obviously, they've played well lately, pushing towards that cut line, but it does feel, just looking around, obviously with our consensus and even further to the bracket matrix, you don't see a lot of Pitt in the field just yet.
No, you don't. But I think Pittsburgh resume is a lot better. I mean, it's a lot better than I thought it was after really looking into it yesterday. 4-5 against quad 1 opponents, over 500. They're 9-8 against Q1 and 2. Their 2 big wins came on the road at Duke and at Virginia. Now, depending on what the committee thinks of Virginia, if they feel like they are safely in the field, that's a pretty significant win. Now, they just have those 2 wins over the field, and they do have 2 quadrant 3 losses, but they are 9-5 away from home, also significant. The one problem with that resume is they have the 343rd non-conference strength of schedule, which is something that would keep them out. However, if they can beat North Carolina tonight, that would put them, for me, that puts them into the field.
And if nothing else, even if Pitt were to lose or were to get to the conference championship game by beating North Carolina, they'd have a very good chance to win it. I mean, I think they would be favored against either opponent in the ACC championship game. Again, doesn't mean anything, but you would be talking about, if nothing else, a very strong potential bid stealer situation with Pittsburgh if they were, again, how we define bid stealer, whatever, I don't know, but certainly a team that was, on the outside looking in coming into the week that wins their conference tournament. I think that's probably a stealer in some form, or at least a what's less than a thief? Like, you a bid borrower. I don't know. Like, what are we doing here? So, it's been a long week. Pitt, though. I mean, again, opportunity is everything, and so we'll see what happens there. Rocco, just
And
wanted
one more.
to pin. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, sorry, one more thing to remember in terms of bid stealing. FAU. If FAU ends up winning the American Conference, there's going to be one extra at-large bid that we're not accounting for right now. So that could change things. That's something for bubble teams, for fans, for everybody to keep in mind. That's one extra bid that might be there that's not there at the moment.
Things are, particularly interesting with that because that tournament championship game is so late in the day. I mean, that is literally the hour before Selection Sunday or the selection show, excuse me, when that ends. I mean, it'll be fascinating. I almost wonder, Rocco, and again, maybe this is me putting my like conspiracy theory tinfoil hat on, that if the committee kind of treats that last spot as if FAU's in the championship game, they treat it as if FAU wins, then Indiana State gets in, and if FAU does not, then Indiana State gets left out, and they can blame the late bid stealer for Indiana State getting left out. Am I crazy? Am I not? And just in general, your thoughts on the Sycamores?
Yeah, the specific process is they would go into that game with two brackets built. So if FAU's opponent were to win, they're the 13 seed in the South, and they've already got it all bracketed up with. And if we're going to use Indiana State as our last team in, with Indiana State out of that bracket, if Florida Atlantic wins, then everything goes back to where it was, and whatever Indiana State playing games on 11 or a 12 line, and we got the rest of the bracket set. So they're going to go into that game with two brackets already built, already emailed to CBS, and some secret studio person will probably never share that other bracket with anybody. But that's literally how it works. It's happened in many years before. It's probably been a couple of years since the last time we got down to the last game like that. But it's going to probably happen this year. We'll see if FAU can at least get to the finals. Otherwise, we're going to have a bid steal no matter what, much like we do in the Atlantic 10. My thoughts on the Sycamores are, could certainly, much like Texas A&M, I think could go either way. They certainly are a team that has to rely a little bit more on resume metrics than most, because there's just not a lot of comparable data, right? Brad mentioned earlier, their only win against the field is against Drake. You could argue if Drake's even a team that would be inside the cut line or not. But if you count that Drake win, they're 1-4 in those opportunities. They are a team that intended to schedule hard, in my opinion, by playing that game at Michigan State, by playing at Alabama. They entered an event that Sweeney, you and I have talked about a lot, where they didn't get matched up against New Mexico, which would have helped everybody. They also could have played UC Irvine there. Didn't happen. But their schedule at 185 is better than New Mexico by almost 100 points. It's better than Providence by 70 points. It's a million times better than Pittsburgh. So at 185, they're actually sitting okay there on the non-conference strength of schedule. I think the 3 wins at Bradley, UNI, and Belmont are still important because they're in the top 2 quads. One of those, I think Bradley's still quad 1, and a 15-5 record away from Terre Haute obviously speaks volumes. And of course, they wouldn't be in this position if they didn't do that much road damage. The other thing I really like about the Sycamores is what I talked about earlier, non-tournament level losses. It only happened to them twice, and it's that well-documented home loss to Illinois State and the one at Southern Illinois. If you combine the 4 halves of those 2 losses, Jason Kent only played 1 half. And the committee has already acknowledged that, if you've been following David Warlock's tweets. So I think some of those things are independently good signs for Indiana State. However, yesterday we could all agree was not a good day for Indiana State, with the way New Mexico performed, with the way St. John's performed, et cetera. So they are in a precarious position, no question about it, much like Texas A&M. But I do think it's going to come down to the wire. And I'm starting, you can take those committee reports however you want. They might be 100% meaningless because the committee should be talking about injuries. And Colorado is a team with a ton of injury background as well. And I just think it makes it all fascinating because we put all this work into it. We look at all these pieces of data, but some of that conversation, it really kind of depends on how that conversation moves along in the room.
Yeah, without question. And I think it's, I will say this, not to criticize anyone on the committee, whatever. I feel confident that the people we have on Fielding the 68 have gone as far into the weeds as possible. Like, they will not be. You guys will not be outdug by the folks out in Indianapolis this week. So we appreciate your efforts as always. We will have an updated bracket this afternoon. We also will have a full bracket tomorrow, and then obviously tune in on Selection Sunday. I know we'll have our bracketologists out in full force, bringing you everything you need to know. Stay tuned again on Fielding the 68. We appreciate all of you joining us. I'm Kevin Sweeney, Rocco Miller, Brad Wachtel. Enjoy the hoops. Should be a fun last couple days.